Good evening. Welcome to week 6 of political violence and terrorism. I hope everyone's had a good week and a good course so far. I just want to start off with the papers. Most of you have gotten pretty much all of you have gotten paper 2 back, and for the most part they were okay. But I want you to get, for future papers, get to the so what. The so what. Why is it important? And what are the organizational characteristics and what are the advantages and disadvantages? And pretty much everyone failed to do this, and that's part of my fault. But for the future, make sure you talk about that. What I mean by that is, a lot of you listed the organizational structure, and that's fine. But what you need to lay out is the advantages, disadvantages of a hierarchical structure versus a more decentralized, fluid structure. So what advantages does Hezbollah have, which is centralized, hierarchical? What disadvantages does it have? What advantages does something like Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb have? And what are the disadvantages? So make sure you kind of outline that clearly. Now, for the future, what you're going to do is you're going to talk about the policy prescriptions to deal with the terrorism threat. How do you defeat it? What are the vulnerabilities, and how can you exploit it from the counterterrorism perspective? And what are the variables for success? Why certain counterterrorism policies succeed while others do not? And that's what I want you to capture in your future papers. For your final paper, I actually want you to go one step forward and ask why, for the final paper, write a kind of a policy memo for defeat of the terrorist organization that you guys are doing your paper on. You can imagine you are now the subject matter expert on that, on whatever terrorist organization is, and your commander or your boss or your national security advisor to the president, and he or she wants to know, okay, how do I defeat this organization? And just to kind of give like a real world scenario for those of you doing Haqqani network, and there's a couple of them, you can imagine that particularly the day after they attacked the U.S. Embassy in 2009, the CENTCOM commander goes to you and says, hey, I want to defeat the Haqqani network. And you have to write a memo for him to do that. And if one of your recommendations is, hey, we need to do cross-border attacks into Pakistan to defeat the Haqqani network, he's going to show that paper with those recommendations up to his boss, Secretary of Defense, or even the president, and he's going to take your recommendation. So your recommendation has to be clear, focused, and solid recommendations for defeat. Make sure you have your decks in a row, because just like in the real world, you're briefing the CENTCOM commander, and he's going to go to the Secretary of Defense and say, hey, we're going to have to do raids into Pakistan in order to defeat the Haqqani network. And if you're going to do something like that, you need to make sure that your analysis is pretty spot on. So that's the kind of analysis I'm looking for particularly the final paper. Just last week, just want to touch on Europe. You probably saw from the videos, a lot of you commented on it, how overt Muslim extremists operated in Europe. And that was a little 2005, 2006. And I'm not going to go into too much more detail on it because you saw it on the video, but you saw kind of Europe's response, how Europe, if you want to say coddled, at least allowed them to operate freely in their countries, vice what you might see in the United States. And that's kind of a huge difference that impacts our counterterrorism policy, our coordination strategy. Europeans won't allow the same countermeasures you see at airports. They'll certainly won't allow those. Most European countries won't allow those body scanners that we see on all our major airports here. So there's definitely a different mentality, and I think that video captured it. So last week, moving on to this week, The Kingdom. Good flick. It's based on a true story. It's not exactly true, but it's based on a true story. It's based on the investigation into the 1996 Khobar Towers attack in Saudi Arabia, and how the Saudi Arabian government at the time served as a significant impediment to that investigation. And it also shows how difficult it is to conduct investigations overseas for counterterrorism. And you saw this again, not just in Saudi Arabia in 1996. You saw it with the USS Cole bombing in 2000. You even seen it with the recent attack in Benghazi, in the Libya attack. So difficult the FBI, how long it took the FBI to actually get on site and do an investigation into Benghazi. So that video shows it well. What you're going to see next week is a video on John O'Neill, who's an FBI senior analyst or senior case agent. And the difficulties he had in conducting overseas investigations in Khobar Towers, and after the 1998 attacks in Kenya and Tanzania, and then against the USS Cole. So, again, it's a good movie. It's pretty entertaining as well, but it also kind of has a real message underneath. So that brings us to the last point. Professor Guerna. And his hour-long lecture, or 40-minute lecture, and his analysis of Israeli, U.S., India, Russian counterterrorism policies. And I thought it was good. I recommend you actually watch it before you watch me. So if you haven't watched it yet, go ahead and turn me off for a second, and then come back to me afterward. But what things I kind of took away from that. He outlines things that you probably know. After September 11th, I think not most, but a lot of people would say that we overreacted after September 11th, and he gives the example of rounding up Muslims that were had very little suspicion, and that this violated all sorts of due process laws. It was no different than kind of it was obviously on a smaller scale. But what happened to the Japanese after World War II, and I think that did happen, and that was particularly not a good chapter in our post 9/11 counterterrorism policy. But he talks about, but he doesn't go into detail. He talks about enhanced interrogation measures. We don't do those to the same extent we did them back, and the question is, was it legal to do it, and was it effective? I come down on one side of it that it's graying legality, and you can please disagree with me on the participation board, and I encourage you to do that. And I would also go as far as to say that strike two, it wasn't as effective as it's made out to be. And this is enhanced interrogation. We only waterboarded 3 people, so there's a myth that we waterboarded people, but we also, there's always some questionable intelligence we get from enhanced interrogations. So not only is it questionably legal, but the intel we get is often constrained. And the big example, and it's not always to make the news, is Al-Libi, who was interrogated in Egypt, not by the United States, and he told his interrogators what they wanted to hear. And what we wanted to hear at the time was that Iraq was involved with WMD and consorting with Al-Qaeda at the time, and that's what he said, under duress. He, of course, would later recant that, and obviously that wasn't a true statement, but there's all sorts of bad intelligence you get from interrogation. And Professor Guyana doesn't talk about it too much, but that is one thing that I think we've gone too far. But the one thing he did bring up that I think is very, very illustrative is Israel and their policy of demolishing houses. So if you're the mom and your son commits terrorism, your house gets demolished, and sometimes your neighbor's house gets demolished. And this is designed to deter terrorism. I question the legality. I think the legality is very difficult to stand up. But the one thing the Israelis did is they did an actual assessment of the effectiveness. And the professor brings that up pretty well. And they said, no, it's not effective. And they stopped it. And I really think that Israel can do it, and they're under a threat, and we cannot. I really think that anyone that says something like enhanced interrogations are ineffective and we should stop them, or one of the other September 11th overreaches are ineffective, and then they can actually stop it. I'm not sure that can be done in the United States, and I'd welcome participation on the discussion board and the contrary. But the professor brings a pretty good example where the Israelis actually said this is ineffective, and they stopped it. I'm going to go one more. The Israeli Professor Garno kind of recommends hybrid. It's supposed to trying people at Guantanamo and military commissions, which he says are varying legality, not trying them in U.S. court systems. He recommends a kind of a hybrid approach where you merge the two, where you don't get the same rights, the same Miranda rights and rights of accused as you would if you were a criminal, but you get some sort of due process. I disagree a little bit. I would go as far as to say that putting terrorists in our justice system isn't bad. In fact, I think it's a lot better than putting them in our military commissions. One, you get a lot of information, and that's the one thing that people overlook. You get a lot of information, intelligence-relevant information, during the justice process, during the normal justice process that occurs, by what the prosecutors have to create, what the FBI or other law enforcement has to actually put together. You get intelligence from that, and it's very good in some cases. You should read some of the transcripts from the trials. So I'm not sure that putting Guantanamo or terrorists in our justice system is such a bad thing. There are reasons you don't want to do it, and you don't want to compromise intelligence perspectives, but you can still bring them in the justice system without compromise. You just can't use classified intelligence to convict someone, and you shouldn't be allowed to do that. I'm in the camp that says you should not be allowed to use classified. You can use classified intelligence to roll up cells and do all that stuff, but you can't use it in court. And I'm in this camp that says you can't convict people based on this. And a lot of stuff came up on Boston where they said, hey, we didn't want to Mirandize these people, but if we didn't Mirandize them, we couldn't use what they said in their criminal case. That, I think, is legitimate. We can go away from Mirandizing people. You can ask them stuff, but you can't turn around and then use that against them. That I think is a civil liberties wrong. But that's something that the professor brings up. And then finally, something he says that we kind of violate, which is now coming in the PRONE program, or coming to the forefront, is the drone program. And what he says is one of his rules for using it is there has to be an imminent threat. And he's talking about the drone program that Israel uses against the Palestinian territories. And that's true. They for the most part, when they conduct an attack using Apache helicopters or Predators in the Gaza Strip or wherever, it is based on an imminent threat. That guy is plotting to bomb the United States, or bomb Israel, or somewhere in the plot to do so. The question that brings up, and that's been brought up in the news, is does our drone program do that? Does our drones, when we attack someone in Yemen or in Pakistan or in Somalia using drones, does that person represent an imminent threat? Are they actually in the midst of a direct plot against the United States? Just something to think about. I'm going to talk about drones next week in detail and what my kind of philosophy is. But that's just something to just kind of keep on the back of your mind. So with that being said, I look forward to your comments on the discussion board, and if there's any issues, please drop me an email. The one thing I do want to say is it's better to shoot me an email directly than to put something on a discussion board or on the Ask the Professor part of the classroom. Just shoot me an email directly. I'll get it back to you. I travel a little bit, so sometimes my phone is my only way to access computer. So just shoot me an email, and if there's any questions, let me know.